Hello, everybody. My name is Ricardo Cabrera. I am the operations manager for the Latino Chamber of Commerce of Boulder County. And this morning we have as our guest Betty Aragon. And Betty is the founder and director of Mujeres de Colores. And also she's the co-founder for Museo de las Tres Colonias, both in Fort Collins. So Betty, welcome. Good morning. How are you today?
Thank you, Ricardo. I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this. It's a great
Yeah,
opportunity. Thank you.
excellent, excellent. Would you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. So, my family came to Fort Collins in 1962. We come from Trinidad, Colorado, where my father was a coal miner. He worked all his coal mines over there in Trinidad. And then we moved to Colorado and we landed in Fort Collins. We've lived here ever since. It's been a really process. Let's put it that way. We moved to Fort Collins in a time when being brown wasn't cool. And so it was a struggle, but we made this our home. It was our root of where we moved to. And so we've lived here ever since. Um, Growing up, going to school here, it's always been really difficult because Fort Collins is a predominantly white community. And growing up and being only a handful of Latinos in school, we learned very quickly that we were the minority. And not only the minority, but we were invisible. And so school was always really difficult because they made us feel like we weren't capable, that we didn't have the ability to go forward. And a lot of my friends would tell me, that they were told, don't even think about going to college because that's not in the works for you. So, growing up and having to really find who we are as our gente. I know that I remember growing up, I wasn't ashamed of my parents. I was ashamed of our circumstances. We lived in one of the Tres Colonias. We lived in Buckingham. We were probably one of the poorest families on the block. And growing up where you don't have indoor plumbing when you're a teenage girl going into a woman. I was 17. We still didn't have indoor plumbing. And it was embarrassing, to have to drag in the metal tub, So that was what I felt ashamed of because I think we were the only ones that didn't have indoor plumbing. And so that was difficult as a young woman, but I never, ever felt ashamed of my mother and my father because they are the ones that gave me life. They made me the woman that I am today. And, I'm very proud of my mom and dad and where I come from. Growing up, it took coming full circle, to be honest with you, of finally standing in my truth of who I am, coming full circle of saying, yeah, I grew up, we were poor. I was ashamed of our circumstances. But now, it's a process of all of us that have to come through the struggle to come to where we are today.
Wow, Betty, that's a success story. I hear it as a success story, and congratulations for that. It takes courage to be able to get through that and to become the person that you are today. So good for you. And I hope a lot of people hear this so they could not feel inspired by your story. Tell me, Betty, then, so from here, from this, I am sure this is part of the reason why now you are the director, co-founder of two great organizations. So you have Mujeres de Colores and you have Museo de las Tres Colonias. Tell me about that. What is it? What do you do? What are your hopes and dreams with that?
Well, I became an advocate in the Hispanic community. Gosh, it's been 20 years in the making now that I've been advocating for the Hispanic community. And that started because I saw where so many didn't have a voice. I even felt my own voice wasn't being heard. And so I wanted to make sure that I did everything to make sure that we had a voice in our community. I would go to the city council meetings, and it was difficult. It's very nerve wracking to get up and speak in front of people, but the need to be heard was more important, and making sure that we found our voice. So, advocating, certainly wanting to make sure when decisions are being made about our community, we're at the table. I don't want somebody making decisions for us. We're capable of speaking and being at that table. So, with becoming an advocate, we continued to work in the community, and then we had an opportunity to get the Museo de las Tres Colonias, Museum of the Three Colonies, Buckingham, Andersonville, and Alta Vista. And the reason that we pushed to make a home into a living history museum was because we wanted to make sure that people understood we didn't just get here, we've been here. And building, it was really the home of Inez and John B. Romero. They were one of the first Hispanics that came to Fort Collins back in the early days, the 20s. And it is one of the last adobe homes in Fort Collins. So we felt that it had a lot of educational value. And not only that, it would put us on the map as far as being an adobe home, being first Hispanics, one of the first Hispanic families to come to Fort Collins and work in the sugar beet industry. We wanted to make sure that we had that history, that it's in the books, that we're part of this community. We're part of the very fabric of Fort Collins. So we pushed for that, and we were able to open Museo de las Tres Colonias in 2016. It is a museo to honor the early Hispanic pioneers that came to Fort Collins to work in the sugar beet industry, but to move it forward and honor all of our Latinos in Fort Collins, because we contributed then and we still contribute today. Now, with Mujeres de Colores,
Mhm.
I retired out of the Museo de las Tres Colonias a couple years ago because I wanted to be able to form an organization, a nonprofit, that we could focus not only on the historic aspect of Latinos in Fort Collins, but to also be able to do programming to help women find their self esteem, to find their voices, to help families and children. So that's where Mujeres de Colores was born. And we continue to work today to make sure that we have programming to help kids with backpacks. I always say that if you give children the tools, they
Mhm.
will succeed.
Mhm.
And then we do a Christmas program because I'm a firm believer that every child should have new Christmas toys and not fall through the cracks and not have anything at Christmas time. So we just finished our Christmas program, and we were able to service 250 families in Fort Collins with Christmas gifts, with food, with gift cards, and we were really proud of that. And taking into account that because of COVID, we were very careful. We made sure we had face masks and face shields when we did service the community.
Wow, that's awesome, Betty. Good. Congratulations. Sounds like you guys do great things. I also believe in tools and strategies that will move the needle and it'll help people get forward. So tools and strategies always a good idea to give people, right? Teach them to fish rather than give them fish. Um,
That's right.
so I'm going to express a little bit of my ignorance here about history. So tell me a little bit about the history of the beet workers in Fort Collins. I mean, I think they started in the early 1900s. It was
That's
a
correct.
migration for the field for manual labor. But tell me more about that. I really want to hear your story and the history of that in Fort Collins.
Well, in Fort Collins, back in the early 20s, in the early 1900s, beet work was big in Fort Collins. It was agricultural, right? And so the first beet workers that did come were German Russians. We always are very inclusive of the history, but my focus is the Hispanic and the Latinos and the Mexican beet workers that came to work in Fort Collins. So in the 20s, Great Western had to turn to a new labor source, and they started recruiting Hispanics from southern Colorado and from Mexico to come and work in the sugar beet industry. And so being recruited and people came to work in the beet fields and the plant, the sugar beet plant. It was right in the center of the Tres Colonias. So Buckingham, Andersonville, Alta Vista, those were all homes that were built to house the beet workers that came to work in the sugar beet industry. But in coming again with beet workers that came to, they settled into these neighborhoods. And of course, there was always that different. People were different. They came from, they spoke a different language. And so these neighborhoods became known as the neighborhoods across the tracks. It became known as the barrio. And so, we built our own little colonies in these neighborhoods where, we always looked out for each other. We built a cohesiveness within our own community of celebrating our language, our music, our food. And but we faced a lot of opposition because in town during the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, right up into the 50s and early 60s, there was signs in downtown Fort Collins that said white trade only, no Mexicans, no dogs. So, that was definitely a barrier that so many people had to it was staring us right in the face, right? So, we had to work around that and overcome discrimination. It's been a battle that we continue to fight today. With the political atmosphere, uh, it's probably we feel like we're taking two steps backwards. So that battle continues, but through the sugar beet industry, the factory actually closed in 1955, and the beet workers then went on to work in construction, learned a skill, better pay, and the work wasn't so backbreaking. But we remember that the fact that all of those folks that worked in the beet fields that used the short hoe, which was outlawed because of the backbreaking, because they were stooped over. It was called stoop labor. Um, it caused so much damage to people that it was outlawed. And certainly the struggle of folks that came to work those beet fields that they faced discrimination, they faced poor wages, they faced poor working conditions. So this is a part of history sometimes people don't want to remember. I don't want it to be forgotten
Mhm.
because these are the folks that came to help flourish. For Collins could have not survived without the beet workers. And so we are part, I continue to always emphasize, we are part of the very fabric of Fort Collins.
Wow, that's such important work to remember the past, to document the past, as you presented. Also a success story because there was a pivot there at some point from meat workers to construction work, uh, and the story continues. And I'm sure from the 20s to now that it's a third generation. Now you have a third generation that hopefully, possibly, and very likely have better opportunities that they did, 80 years ago. So from there, tell me a little bit about your monument. I hear you're working on a monument to memorialize and commemorate the beet workers in Fort Collins.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for allowing me to share this because I am so proud of this project. Again, I always feel like it's so important to remember our ancestors, remember the shoulders that we stand on in history. They came before us, and we must never forget their legacy. So, with that, a couple years ago, Sugar Beet Park was dedicated into North Fort Collins. It's right in the center of the Tres Colonias. And I loved the concept of Sugar Beet Park. So I went to the dedication, and I was really kind of surprised and disappointed. Um, when I saw the park, it's beautiful, but it talked about the sugar beets. It didn't talk about who picked them. And so I felt like there was a very important piece missing. And so when I went home afterwards and I thought about it, I thought about it for about a month, and I kept thinking, I've got to do something. This isn't this isn't complete history. And so with that, I talked to a friend of mine, Mario from Longmont, and who's an artist, and he introduced me to Frank Garza, who's also an artist, local from Loveland. And so he and I started talking and brainstorming, and came up with, listen, these are folks that live in our community, and this is what they are saying about the need to be recognized. What can you go back after telling you what it is, the concept that I'm looking for? You can go back and come up with the concept. And he did. He came up with the concept of the short hoe because it was outlawed and because of the damage that it did to people's backs. And the hand that holds it is our struggle. So I love this, and we are getting so much reception of the monument. There's nothing like it in Colorado anywhere, and so we're really proud that we're moving forward, and that we are really going to be able to honor all of those beet workers that worked in the sugar beet fields. Anybody that worked any kind of field work is going to be honored with this monument right in Sugar Beet Park. We're adding to the story, and we have something where beet workers no longer feel that shame, that stigma of, oh, you're a beet worker. They're going to have pride. There's going to be pride in this monument, pride in our people, proud in our ancestors that did the work. And so I am just thrilled that we are halfway there with our donations. We got a big donation from the Bohemian Foundation and the DDA that came through, and they're doing a matching grant right now to help us to get there. So we are working hard to make sure that we got the funds to build this. It is community driven, and I am confident that we will make this happen. I am just a firm believer that when you stand in your truth and you go forward in doing what is right, there is always a way to make it happen.
Well, thank you, Betty, for sharing all of this. This is a beautiful story, great history. You have some great organizations to make it all happen. For everybody else, Betty, we're going to put all your information for Mujeres de Tres Colores and the Museo de las Tres Colonias down here in the description with links to websites so people can see what you're doing. The monument that you're building is beautiful. I've seen mock-ups and pictures of it, and it's a great work, piece of art, and great work that you're doing for the community there in Fort Collins. So thank you for sharing. Good luck to you in everything you do. And before we go, I have one last surprise question for you. Are you ready?
Okay.
All right. So, what is your favorite word?
My favorite word. My favorite word that comes immediately to mind is courage.
Excellent.
Courage.
Beautiful, beautiful. And it defines you and it describes you. So thank you for everything. And thank you all for being with us. Until next time.
Did you want me to say anything in Spanish?
That's the next interview. So we'll finish this
Okay.
one and then we'll go in Spanish.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. And I appreciate all the work that you do at the Latino Chamber of Commerce of Boulder. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And look at our other video that will be in Spanish. Thank you.
Thank you.